Good evening and welcome to A Day in the Job series by Career Development Cell IIT Madras. The series is intended to help you understand various sectors via conversations with alumni. I am Sanjeev, a third year undergraduate student in the Engineering Design Department. I'm currently co-heading the Career Development Cell at IIT Madras. In today's session, we'll be exploring analytics. With vast quantities of data being generated, the data science vertical is key to mining actionable insights for businesses. And the demand for data scientists has been growing year by year. Also, data analytics and data science constitutes a large portion of roles that we usually have for placements as well. To understand more about the sector, we have Roshan Santhosh with us today. Roshan Santhosh is currently a data scientist at Facebook, California. After graduating from IIT Madras in 2016 in engineering design, he worked as a business analyst in American Express for 2 years. Following that, he did an MS in data science at University of Pennsylvania and was the president of the Penn Data Science Group there. He was also the head of the analytics team while in IIT Madras. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule and joining us today, Roshan.
Yeah, glad to be here, I guess.
Yeah. So, to begin the session with, could you give us a brief introduction to data science from your perspective?
Yeah, I guess almost everybody is sort of very familiar with the field of data science by now. So as you already kind of put it, it's essentially the field of working with data and extracting insights from it, so that can be used by businesses for whatever their end purpose is. So by definition itself, it's like a very broad domain. Like you have all these different terms like analytics, machine learning, all of them are sort of just clubbed together to essentially define this entire domain. So but ultimately it just boils down to using whatever data you have and utilizing it to get some sort of a business or competitive edge in whatever field that you work in. So that's like data science, I guess.
Right. So, there's a lot of profiles like called data analyst, data scientist, data engineer, or business analyst, and many others, right? So, can you give a brief about what exactly is the difference between them, or is it all the same? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the issues with like the domain of data science, since it's so new. There's no strict definition of what a data analyst is or what a data scientist is, or like what the difference between the two is. But generally, I guess the sort of consensus that there exists right now is that I guess data scientists have a bit more of, say, a theoretical, statistical background or some sort of a formal education, I guess. And the data analyst is probably uh, kind of a hybrid between a consulting and a data scientist role. Like that's sort of the idea that I have. Like people definitely could have like uh, a different definition of what a data analyst or business analyst is. But usually you would expect like a data scientist role to be more ML, machine learning heavy, and a data analyst to be a bit more like customer facing as well as data, a combination of both. Data engineering, though, I think is a bit more kind of well defined. That's a role essentially where your work is not so much on like say deriving insights or communicating insights. It's more on developing the sort of the backend or the backbone of your data processing pipelines. So typically you would find people with a computer science background who have, say, experience in setting up databases, like setting up AWS or like GCP clusters and so on. So those are the people who end up taking up these data engineering roles. I think for data engineering, you could say like the job description is quite different compared to say the data scientist or data analyst roles.
Got it. So, and like, would it differ according to the company that you are in as well? The
Yeah,
role.
as I said, this is it's not a well-defined sort of a domain
Mhm.
right now. So every company would have like a different definition, and at times I've seen like companies simply offering up the role of data scientist, even though the work might not be that of a data scientist. So that's one of the, I guess, the say I guess the negative aspect of it, because like essentially anybody with not that much of a background or say prior experience could end up getting like a data scientist role in some company, because the company decides that okay, the amount of experience you need to be called a data scientist is only this much. So because of that, the kind of the weight that a data scientist role carries, that is a bit diluted, because you can never know, like, because almost everybody just calls themselves a data scientist. So there's no way of knowing, like, is this person have a certain amount of experience or knowledge. So yeah, I guess it again varies a lot across companies.
Got it. So now, could you share what an average day of your work life looks like nowadays?
Yeah. So to be honest, like I've recently joined Facebook. It's been about like 2 or 3 weeks as of now.
Mhm.
So at Facebook, right now I'm still in sort of the onboarding phase, you could say. So right now my day is mostly familiarizing myself with sort of the Facebook's environment. So Facebook is a big company. They have a lot of different processes and tools and so on, and it takes a good amount of time to actually get familiar with all the tools and what are the different processes that happen within Facebook. So right now I'm just in that process of understanding what are the different teams, what do they work on, what are the tools they use, and so on. So I'm still very much in the early process of getting started at Facebook.
Okay. So just for the students, I mean, so how was the average work life maybe at American Express or like some
Yeah.
other data science firms? Yeah.
Yeah, so I worked for 2 years at American Express, and that was a business analyst role. So I worked in a specific team, so the risk management team at American Express. So the overall goal of our team was essentially trying to minimize risk. So American Express deals with credit cards. That's the entire like major business, and we essentially built and managed models which essentially predicted the probability of somebody not paying back their credit card bills. So that's the kind of the overall goal of like the teams. But my role was like I was in like a specific sub team within this entire huge department, and that team's role was a bit more on, say, the reporting side of things. So my role on a day-to-day basis was essentially sort of monitoring the health of the models. If some numbers go up or go down, like we had to pull some numbers from the database and like make slides and like presentations about it. So yeah, I would say it kind of sticks to the definition of a business analyst, not so much of a data scientist. I wasn't running experiments like A/B tests. I wasn't like doing hypothesis testing of any sort, nor was I doing a lot of like say modeling, which was my sort of that's something what I was interested in. But apparently, like the team that I was like finally allocated, like that's not the kind of work that they did. So it was a bit more of kind of a reporting ad hoc sort of work. Yeah, so that was essentially my, I guess, my day to day at Amex.
So you talked about building models as something interesting. So what are some other interesting things about this particular domain that really got you into it and kept you in it?
So I got interested in this domain during my third year of, I guess, when I was doing my internship. So it just so happened that I had a bunch of time to spend. So I ended up doing the machine learning course by Andrew Ng on Coursera. And I guess like almost everybody is aware of that course by now. But at that point, it was fairly new and not many people were taking that up. And I just took it out of curiosity. And what really interested me was that it was sort of a good mix of programming and statistics, maths, and also it had like a good sort of a application aspect to it. So this was like prior to my third year, I was a bit involved in like competitive programming. doing all those hacker rank and code chef competitions and stuff. So I had a very good interest in programming. So when I actually saw this course, it was, I guess, it kind of interested me because it already had the programming aspect to it, but it also had like the statistics and like the application to it. So that's what really got me interested. And like over the years, realized that this field has a lot more potential. Like there are essentially so many different things that you can do with data, and like building different sort of model for it. And I guess one example that I kind of throw around, like to anybody who asks me about this, is the Moneyball movie. So yes, so I don't think a lot of people are actually aware of the Oakland Athletics and what they did with essentially applying statistics to money to baseball. But the movie Moneyball kind of very captures it like quite well. So that's sort of the example that I throw around a lot, and I essentially say that, hey, if you have the data, and you can actually do a lot of wonders with it. So that's one of the reasons I sort of kind of decided that, this is the path that I want to follow.
Interesting. So you talked about the things you liked about it, and are there any angles that you aren't particularly fond of, if I may, in like after getting into data science?
So personally for me, like I guess as a domain, I like the things that I am working on. I'm quite fond of whatever that I'm working on right now. So personally, I don't see like any drawbacks of it. But then as a overall domain, there are like a lot of issues that are coming up right now. So like I do see that, at least like since it's a new domain, like the process of interviewing for like data science roles, it's kind of very vague at the moment. I see a lot of instances of companies essentially asking software engineering questions for like data scientists, like asking them about like core programming or data structure principles for data science roles, which doesn't really make sense. But then, to be fair, I guess these are companies that don't really have a data science team. They don't really know like what are the questions I should be asking for a data scientist. So that's sort of like a thing which I guess the industry has to kind of work on. There are also issues of like, the ethics regarding the use of data, and also like uh, the models that people end up building. There are a lot of new cases right now coming up on like different model biases, like even like face recognition. That's a hot topic right now, like how it's severely biased to people of a certain kind of race or color and so on. And so those are like sort of things that like the domain has to kind of work towards. And to a certain extent, I also see that, um, at least in the US, I feel that companies don't stress too much about the specific major that you come from. But in India, at least, I see that companies just tend to rely on, okay, I need a data scientist, I'm just going to rely on a computer science grad to fill that role, which I think is a bit misleading, because you could very well have a computer science student who actually hasn't taken any, say, machine learning or stats courses. So I think like that's idea, or that notion that only computer science students can do that, that needs to change. I feel it's not there so much in the US, but at least while I was at Amex in India, I felt that it still was one of the issues.
So, I mean, you mentioned companies asking, data structure questions for ML interviews, and how important do you think is, a knowledge in structures and algorithms for data science? I mean, if for an aspirant, basically.
So again, I mean, it depends on the company. Um, if you really like a company and want to join the company, and the company is hell bent on like asking you those questions, then I don't see any way around it. But personally, I haven't, like, I've worked on a lot of different things, like over these years, like different projects as well as different companies. I have never really felt that my lack of knowledge on these topics has ever stopped me from doing anything. Like, I don't think that I've ever even come close to reaching that point. So I'm not really sure like how relevant it is. I mean, I don't think it is. But yeah, I just want to add that some people kind of confuse this statement with essentially kind of compare it to saying that programming is not important for data scientists. That's a completely different thing. Data scientists should know how to code. They should be familiar with writing code in Pandas or Python or R. So writing code is definitely a requirement, but what I'm referring to is essentially all these lead code sort of questions where they ask you like, this is a red black tree or something, and like what is the time complexity of it and stuff like that. So that's the sort of questions which I don't think is really relevant, except maybe like if you're applying for an ML engineering role, maybe then. But for a data scientist, I don't think it's really relevant to whatever work they're going to work on. So that's I guess, the only point, I guess.
That's a very interesting perspective. I mean, I think it's sort of a misconception regarding that.
Yeah, it's easy to have these misconceptions because people will come up and say that, I'm a data scientist. I'm not the one who's supposed to be coding it. But like, when I say that, companies shouldn't rely on data structure questions for like, hiring their data scientists, I by no means am I saying that you should not expect the data scientist to know how to be able to code. That's a completely different thing from what I'm saying. They should be able to code, but like they should not be like well versed in like the time complexities or like the different data structures, because you hardly end up using data structures in your data science pipelines. So it's a common misconception, I guess.
Got it. So, after your 2 years at Amex, and like, what made you really decide to go and do an MS in data science?
Yeah. So I think there were a couple of reasons for that. So um, one of the reasons was that I was really interested in research, like machine learning and deep learning, even during my undergrad. So I did my thesis on computer vision, which was something which I really liked. And once I started doing my job at Amex, um, as I mentioned, it was very much a reporting sort of a business analyst role. There was very little of like say machine learning, or like let alone like deep learning. So I really wanted to like pursue research to kind of just to improve myself and to learn more. So that was one of the reasons. And another reason was that, as I mentioned, this is a new domain, and like the hiring processes, like, all of that is kind of just still in its kind of native stages. So companies do tend to look at what is the major or what is your background, right? So as I mentioned, people were looking for CS majors or math majors or stat majors or something of that sort when they were hiring data scientists. And the only thing which I had to say was like, I'm a dual degree student from engineering design. It's hard enough that nobody really knows what engineering design is. It's even more difficult to convince them that somebody from engineering design might be the right fit for a data scientist role. So I realized that even though I had like good amount of experience and knowledge in the field, um, the lack of a degree might be kind of a roadblock for me when I'm applying to other companies. So therefore, I decided that if I do a master's, I can get rid of that roadblock, as well as it gives me like 2 years to work on research. So that's what kind of motivated me to apply for a master's.
Got it. So, how does the career progression look like in the long run? And like, does it depend on your entry position? Maybe like a data analyst or a data scientist or a data engineer. How much does it depend on that?
So career progression. So I'm not really sure like what do you mean by that. So I mean, if you mean like, how quickly do you advance through the ranks, like in a company,
Yeah.
um, I guess I don't think there's like a well set definition for that. The typical sort of like build up that you see is you have a company that starts where you start off as a data scientist, then you could become like a senior data scientist, and then on top of that you become like a data science manager. That's sort of like the hierarchy that I see. In terms of how quickly you reach there, I guess that entirely depends on the company, and as well as the work that you do. So I think there's like very little definition of how somebody progresses through the ranks. Um, Again, that's pretty much because it's a new domain. Every company has its own way of deciding how different things work. So yeah, I think I can't give like a very concrete answer for that.
Yeah, so I wasn't looking at, how exactly, like how fast you'll move on, but like what exactly might be the, sort of positions that will be in the long run. And you answered that as well. So,
Okay.
and but would there be any difference depending on your entry position? Like I said, like as a data engineer, or how hard would it be to shift for, say, a data analyst to data scientist, or things like that?
Yeah. So data analyst, if they want to become like a data scientist, this is again assuming that both these roles are like roles available within a company. Like it's possible that a company calls their data scientist data analyst, or like the other way around. I would assume that if they have two different roles, like data analyst and data scientist, it's possibly because they kind of consider data scientist to be the one with a bit more experience or knowledge or something of that sort. So if you are in a data analyst role and you want to move to like a data scientist role, I would expect that you would have like say sort of the basic qualifications of a data scientist, which I would say would be sort of a strong foundation in like probability and stats, right? Like being able to understand like is a new trend that you're seeing, is that like a significant trend? Is that something you should actually act upon or not? So a good understanding of like probability and statistics, good overview of like different machine learning models that are there out right now. um, and then I guess one of the skills which I think is really important for a data scientist. I mean, it's not something you can actually test during any sort of an interview, but to kind of perform well as a data scientist, or have like a good data scientist career, I think one skill that everybody should pick up is like the ability to learn on their own. There is very little that a master's can do. Like the 2 years that you do your master's, you would have like a very sort of an accelerated growth. You will learn a lot in a very short amount of time. But uh, I think this is one of the unique components about data science. It's one of those domains that's progressing at a very rapid pace, unlike say some of the other domains. So if you come out of your masters and then kind of stick with whatever knowledge you have from your masters, then pretty sure that in like one or even less than 1 year, you might become a bit outdated. So once you're out of your college or your master's program, it's sort of up to you to devote at least some time to upskill yourself, like either reading Medium articles or going through Kaggle discussion boards, and making sure that you are aware of like what are the new models that are coming up, what are the new pipelines or packages that are out there. So that's one thing which I think like the skill to learn on your own. That's something which will definitely put you, or at least like help you in your sort of your data science career.
That's interesting. So, and if a person chooses to, switch domains after, I mean, they try out being a data scientist for a while, and then they sort of want to switch, like, what are the different maybe avenues available?
Uh, From a data scientist, I think it depends entirely on like what
Mm-hmm.
role is it that you plan to switch to. I mean, to a certain extent, the skills that you have as a data scientist, right, like manipulating data, like at least like the very basic skill set is like, you know how to get high level statistics out of your data set and like look at trends and so on. I think that is a skill set that can apply to almost any other domain right now. But then again, is that enough for you to jump into a new role? I don't think so. Like if you are a data scientist and you decide like, okay, I want to become a mechanical engineer or like take up a mechanical engineering role, I don't think your skill set, your data science skill set really qualifies you for that role. Like it could definitely assist you. It could make you a better mechanical engineer if you already have like the mechanical engineering skill set. But is that enough? I don't think so. Though other roles I can think which you can sort of move on to is like probably consulting roles. So yeah, I think as I could probably like highlight this. So one skill set which people really don't think about a lot when they decide to go on this data science career is communication skills. So this is something which I feel is like really important, and even for like the different various interviews I did, um, I feel that communication skills was one of the key differentiators that helped me kind of differentiate myself from like say the other candidates. And people when they, I mean, I can understand why people don't really stress on it because people, I guess, it's not there out much right now. And essentially, when people kind of prepare for data science role, they tend to do all the SQL questions or like the statistic questions and so on. They try to learn up on the ML models. But what they forget is like one of the key components of data science or a data scientist's role is that once you build a model and you say get some insights and you think that okay, this model can improve revenue or something of that sort, right? um, it's your responsibility or your kind of yeah, it's essentially your responsibility to be able to communicate that okay, this is what the model does, and if you implement this is like what the expected outcome is going to be. A lot of people really um, don't kind of stress on that, and therefore during the interviews when companies actually check for that particular skill set, they fall short. So and a lot of times they end up thinking that I have a good experience, I have good knowledge of ML, I have some previous experience as well, then why did they not select me? And a lot of times I feel that it's the communication skills, because so this is something which I think was sort of relevant during my time at Amex. So there was a lot of stress on making sure that we really simplify like the complicated ML work that was being done by teams into a manner that can be very easily accepted by the higher ups, like the upper management, because the for the upper management, I guess in almost all companies right now, most of them come from a very, I guess, non-data science background. So when you start telling them about random forests and neural networks and so on, and that these networks can like predict with much better accuracy, it's difficult for them to sort of comprehend it, like because all these topics are quite new for them. Most of them are very familiar with like linear regression models or like logistic regression models. So in linear regression you can tell them that okay, this variable has so and so coefficient, so like this is how the model works, and it's very easy for them to digest that. But if you give them something a bit more complicated than that, which like so say something like neural networks is sort of a complete black box, right? If they tell you like okay, why exactly is the model saying that this guy will default on his credit card, it's very difficult for us to explain other than using certain heuristic approaches. And it's even more difficult for them to accept that how can I just put this model into production? Like, what if it starts uh, performing poorly, like all of a sudden? So it's very much on the data scientist to be able to like communicate that, okay, this is what the model does. This is we have done extensive analysis, and we are assured of at least this much increase in profit or revenue and so on. So yeah, as a whole, I would say that communication skills is something that people really need to work on.
Got it. I think that is something a lot of people aren't really aware of, like you said, and it's really something important. And so,
Yeah.
going back to your college days, how much do you think the PORs that you did really helped you?
Uh, so specifically for my roles or like the interviews that I ended up getting, I don't think my PORs did much. I don't think they mattered, to be honest, because I was already very much in the field of analytics. I had done like a bunch of projects. I was involved with the analytics club. I was doing my master's thesis. So I already came pretty much backed up with a sort of a good experience in the field. So when I was doing my interviews, the companies actually were interested in like the projects that I did, and my interviews were mostly just about the projects and my sort of my theoretical background in that domain. So like PURs and like, yeah, I think the only thing that helped was during my Amex interview, the VP who interviewed me, he saw that I was into volleyball and that we had won the Schroeter. So he was like, okay, you'll be a good addition to his team. Like, so Amex had like a sports event, like a 3 day sports event. So like I guess that was the only thing that really helped me, like besides my analytics background. But I don't think PORs really mattered for that particular, for at least for like my data science interviews, it didn't really matter.
Okay, but so I mean, would your soft skills could have been improved due to the PORs, right? Or if there's any student, you said that soft skill, like improving the soft skills is pretty important. And like, do you have any specific advice for them so as to how
Yeah,
they can,
yeah, that's definitely true. So your soft skills, like definitely you have to work on it. As I mentioned, communication is an important aspect of this. So any sort of position or role that can actually help you with that, I would definitely say go for it. So PORs can be anything, right? Like you could, like, I don't know, like I mean, I can't think of a specific role right now, but like I would assume that there are certain PORs which have a lot more, which involves a lot more, like, talking to clients or like talking to people, like telling them, okay, this is Shastra, this is Sarang, this is what we do. So certain PORs would involve a lot more of, say, like those soft skill aspects, like communications and stuff. Certain would not. So I don't think companies that interview you would know that, okay, this particular role would mean that he had like good communication skill. Except maybe in a few cases, it's quite like if you were in like in a sponsorship role, they would assume that, okay, you might have talked to a lot of people, and maybe you communication is something that you are kind of strong at. But I guess communication is something which sort of they sort of test you during the interview itself. Like when they ask you questions and they ask you to like explain your thought process, like that by itself is a test of your communication skills. So your entire interview itself is a test of your communication skills. They essentially ask you about your previous experiences. You have to communicate like your previous experiences in a way that they can understand. Like like the candidate should be able to sort of gauge that, okay, this person is somebody who's well versed in ML, so I can probably like go into a bit more of the details. Or this person is somebody who's like an upper management person, so I should like try to simplify my project in a way that he can understand. So the interview itself is sort of a test on your communication skills. Um, so that itself is a way for companies to understand, like, at least the communication side of things. But like, yeah, there are different soft skills that might come in handy. So getting into like these PORs which help you improve those soft skills, that's definitely a plus. But I do think that there are possibly like some better avenues than uh, just pursuing POS for the sake of improving your soft skills.
Got it. And I think the fact that you said that you kind of have to look from the perspective of the HR and like see if it's like explaining things in a way that is suitable for the person, that's a really interesting thing as well. So, and look, so consider if I'm a student, aspiring to pursue a career in data science or analytics, like, what advice would you give in terms of, understanding sector as well as preparing for it?
So preparing for yeah, so before you actually like start applying, I think data science as a field has sort of broadened a lot, and that there are a lot of different things that you can do as a data scientist. So essentially, like in terms of where you want to apply yourself, so you can apply data science in like the finance sector, or like you could do something for like social good, and like so essentially a lot of different like application wise, there are a lot of different domains. So I would suggest that the time that you have right now is where you can actually like experiment with these different domains, trying to understand that do I want to work in this, this particular domain of applying data science to finance or something of that sort. So that's something which I feel you should experiment with now and sort of understand what is it that you prefer, so that you can concentrate on that. Um, so there's this debate of whether you should be like a generalist or somebody who's like very specific, and like really skilled in just like a very particular skill set or very particular domain. So I've heard like different arguments about both, but for people like who are coming out of ITM right now, like it's very hard to expect people to be like domain experts in any one field. So what I would suggest is like get yourself equipped with, say, the broad sort of a skill set, like something that's applicable to like different domains. But at the same time, keep in mind like what it is that you prefer. Like if you are interested in finance, then build up that sort of that base skill set, and then sort of start focusing on like finance. And when you sit for placements, probably start focusing on the finance companies that are looking for data scientists, and then you can sort of apply to them. So the reason I stress that you should keep sort of a basic skill set is because that gives you the option to like apply to other companies. um, because if you very well set yourself that okay, I'm only going to focus on like on the models that are used in finance, which might be like mostly say time series sort of modelings and so on, then you sort of restrict your choices right now itself. So I would say that if you have that basic broad skill set, it gives you more opportunity. And once you have that, then you can start probably focusing on the areas that you like.
Got it. So speaking of, interviews and placements, what do you think a recruiter looks for in the resumes of the people?
So,
And what do
so
you think will make them stand out? Yeah.
yeah, I think so. I just remembered like one point. So for the previous question, like what you can do, one advice which I got from like when I was applying for roles and stuff is that you should try to build an online profile. That's I think that's a quite a relevant sort of an advice that I got. So. Um, what this person essentially told me is that a lot of times when companies um, so I understand that like for bigger companies who receive like 1,000 2,000 resumes and stuff, they do have some sort of like basic filtering, which I'm assuming is some sort of a automated process of some sort. But like when a final set of like 50, 100 resumes lands on a team's desk, I'm assuming, and this is what they told me, is that they sort of do a very quick online search. Like they'll just take your name and they'll just put it on Google and they'll just search, essentially search your name, and they'll look at the top results that come. So what they essentially look for is that, are you somebody who has done some sort of significant work in the past? Have you published some papers? Do you have like a Google Scholar profile? Have you shared something on LinkedIn or stuff like that? So having an online profile is important because that does let you kind of set yourself apart from the rest. Because resume by itself, uh, again, yeah, resume by itself is a bit is very much, could be very much misleading these days, um, because there are sort of like some worrying trends in data science. You have people um, essentially replicating other people's GitHub repos and saying that, okay, I worked on so and so project, and these could be like some very, like, it's essentially like some specific projects are like sort of the dummy projects right now. Like everybody has worked on sentiment analysis, everybody has worked on the Titanic data set, or like digit recognition. So those sort of projects kind of have lost their value to a certain extent, because almost everybody is just like, I mean, it's very much possible that people do work on it by themselves and put an effort and learn and like have implemented something of their own, but it's very difficult for like recruiters to actually differentiate that. Like so a quick thing which people do is like, just search for this person online and look at, what all has he done. Is there something that kind of sets him apart, whether it's a research paper, or like an online article about this person implementing data science in a product or something of that sort. So having an online profile really sort of helps. And I guess the question was about like interview prep.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
was coming to that.
yeah. So for interviews specifically, um, I guess the sort of the key things is to have like a good like theoretical knowledge of different domains, specifically like stats and like probability, um, some understanding of ML. Like I'm not aware of like the courses that are offered at INSTI right now, but I do remember there being an ML course back when I was there. I would only assume that they are more, say, data science or like ML related courses. So if I think that if you do any one of those courses, you would have like a good understanding of, the different types of models and like different sort of, subdomains within machine learning. So if you have a good knowledge of that, that's going to help you. So yeah, for interviews and stuff, one thing that can really set you apart is doing like projects. And when I say projects, it's, yeah, so I think there are two types of projects. You could have projects which you do with like, your professor, like some sort of a research project, which is definitely useful. If you are doing a research project, then definitely try to convert it into a paper, because that sort of exponentially increases the value of that project. But I guess what's more important is working on projects with companies. So that's something which I wanted to do as part of the analytics club, but we weren't able to at that point. But that's something which we have been able to do at the Penn Data Science Group over here. So the Penn Data Science Group looks out for companies, like reaches out to companies, tells them, that we have students who have skills in data science, and if you have the data and a problem, then we are willing to help you kind of solve it. So it's a win-win for both the companies and the students. The companies can essentially derive insights from their data, and for the students, it's an opportunity to actually work on a real-world data set. So one thing you sort of realize is that there's a huge difference between um, like the class projects. Even if you do a machine learning course, the class projects that you do and what actually happens in real life applications is very different. And that's one of the reasons why people look for experience when they're recruiting for data science roles, is because they feel that, okay, this person has only done Kaggle competitions or class projects. They actually don't know the intricacies of working on a real world, real life like data set. So that's one of the best things that you can do. I'm not sure if there is any infrastructure right now at Insti that allows for that. But if not, that's something that somebody at Insti or like the analytics club should definitely look at, because I'm very sure there are companies which have data and don't have like data scientists to work on. So if it works over here, I'm pretty sure it should work over there as well, because that's one of so a lot of people end up having this issue that getting roles is difficult because they don't have prior experience. Well, this is one way of getting experience while you are at college itself. I mean, besides internships and stuff, internships definitely is one way, but the way that you can enhance your profile and your chances is by working on more such projects. So company projects, like real life projects, is one sort of thing that people should definitely look for. But if that's not an option, then I guess the next best cases would be working on Kaggle competitions, performing well on them, and this would essentially give you like a topic to discuss during an interview. So yeah, interview wise, as I mentioned, communication skills is important. And for a lot of the um, so yeah, one thing that's also, I guess, important is for a data scientist is that you should be able to translate a business problem into a data problem. That's a skill set which only a data scientist could probably fill. Like business, like companies, the upper management, they can come and say that, okay, our revenue is going down, or like they can essentially say that this is the problem that we are facing. Our user engagement is going down, our retention is going down, or something of that sort. Like, what can we do about it? Um, so it's essentially like a data scientist skill set, or maybe the responsibility or role to be able to translate that business problem into a data science problem. So they can say, okay, our retention is going down. So then essentially you should try to build a model on these specific data sets with this specific metric that we need to be looking at, and train a model that tries to predict this metric, or like tries to predict this particular goal target variable. So that is something which people should be sort of kind of upskilling themselves on. I think a good resource for that is actually these consultancy case studies. So I remember there being like resources on like essentially resources that people use for like consultancy interviews. Those case studies, you can essentially like extend them to like data science case studies. um, and the reason I say that is because for at least for my interview at Facebook, two of the interviews were very much focused on this particular skill set. So um, one of the interviews was essentially like it was quite straightforward. The manager essentially told me that we are planning to kind of introduce a new feature on the Facebook app. What do you think are the potential issues over here? Like, what are the different things do you think that we should actually take into account? Like, that was the only question. I guess my entire half an hour interview was me trying to answer this question. So what they wanted me to do was essentially come up with all sorts of like different things that we as a data scientist should think about. So in a way, I feel it's like very similar to a case, like a consultancy case study. So I came up with like different sort of answers. Like, some people might like this feature because of so and so reason. Some people might not like it for so and so reason. And yeah, so this was so the feature that they were thinking was like they simply mentioned like something like suppose we start giving birthday notification, not birthday notifications. If we start giving prompts to users, essentially saying that okay, this is somebody's birthday today. Do you want to wish them a birthday, wish them birthday or not? And essentially give you a prompt at the very top of your newsfeed. And one of my answers was that, a certain group of people might not like the feature because this particular prompt might make them feel that, oh, Facebook knows too much information about me. I do not like the fact that Facebook knows me so well, right? Like, so the app knowing the user very well might also be a reason why people dislike the feature, which is a very sort of a convoluted reasoning, but he actually liked that particular uh, sort of that reasoning a lot, because that is a fact. There are a lot of people who don't like the fact that Google knows my location a lot, like knows wherever I have been in last like 1 or 2 years and stuff like that. So the fact that I was able to kind of pick out that very small group of people, and that there could be this very small subset of people who might dislike it for this particular reason, that kind of showed him that he can actually cover all the bases. So that skill set, to be able to understand that okay, this is the problems or the new feature that we're going to release, or this is the problem statement that we're going to work on, and to be able to understand that these are the possible outcomes, or that this is the model or the data that we need to look at, that's an important skill set. So translating a company's business needs to a data science problem, that's a skill set that you should prepare for.
Got it. I think that's something a lot of people again might not have focused on, but hopefully they will.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, regarding the sector again, going back, you did talk about a few misconceptions about the sector. But is there anything else that you might want to add on to that when if there is an aspirant again?
um, I can't think of this. I can't think of any other specific points per se. Like misconceptions wise, I guess. Yeah, it's only like the communication part that people are not aware of, and like the real life sort of like essentially like translating a business problem to a data solution.
Hmm, got it. So I think like one question that a lot of students might have is that there is this learning courses and doing theory, and then like you said, this separate thing of doing it actually practically by with projects. So like, do you have anything to say to the students who are like, I have to do a lot of theory before getting into the projects, or like with companies, internships, all that. So how much do you think a company really expects you to know when you like just start trying to get that experience?
So that also depends a lot on the specific role you're applying for. So if you are applying to the recommendation team of a particular company, they would be hiring people only if they have like some sort of a basic understanding of like recommendation engines and like the different models that are available out there. So if you are applying for like a specific role like that, then you would definitely need to have some sort of a theory, because something as sort of broad as recommendation engine, I would assume that there would at least be like a few candidates who already have that theory, that theoretical understanding of that domain. So they would definitely get an edge over you. But if you are applying for like some very like generic roles within companies, or like say broader teams, then again I think the expectations might be different. But it's kind of hard to kind of pinpoint like how much knowledge should I have before applying to a specific role. um, I would say that as long as you have that basic theoretical knowledge of the statistics and like the different ML models that are out there, and that if you can demonstrate somehow that you are somebody who can like learn quickly, or that you can learn on your own, then you're sort of good to go, I guess. Again, I guess it depends a lot on the companies and like what they are looking for. But one thing which I don't think you can actually find anywhere else is like sort of the practical experience of it. So for my own like essentially for my masters at least, I chose to focus more on the projects than the courses. uh, I mean, doesn't mean that I didn't actually like do the courses well or anything of that sort. It's just that I uh, didn't sort of overload myself with like very difficult courses, like and like be like, I should do the 10 most difficult courses over here and learn as much as possible. I sort of like uh, didn't I sort of kept my course workload um, to sort of a low level or something, and chose to focus more on projects. So from my very first semester itself, so my first semester I worked with the Wharton Analytics Fellow. So this was again, this is something similar to what the Penn Data Science Group does, where the Wharton. So this is managed by the Wharton Management School. So Wharton gets together with companies and they say that okay, we have students who can work on your data problems. So I worked with the City Group in my first semester, and then after that I worked with ACLU, which is a non-profit organization that is essentially fights like these civil liberty cases in US. Um, and yeah, so one of the things about the project with ACLU is that this was again a project with an NGO where we were trying to get more experience and they were trying to solve the problem. But the good thing was that we learned so much and we were able to do such good work that we finally ended up publishing a paper out of it. This got accepted at a conference. So there are a lot of like benefits of working on these like projects. One of the reasons being that these companies they come up with unique problem statements and unique data sets. It's not something that you will find on your Kaggle website or like any other public repositories. This was a very specific data set and a data problem that this organization had. And because of that, the paper and the work that we did, it had its own unique value. And that's one of the reasons why it got accepted at the conference. So this sort of experience I think was like really helpful because I could it helped me increase my online presence. It also gave me like talking points during my interview where I could tell them that I worked on this. It was entirely a student led project where we worked from like getting the data, cleaning the data, coming up with the hypothesis, and then working on like establishing them and so on. So I think that aspect really helped with my interview process because at the end of the day, if you do like 8 or 9 like really tough courses, all you can do is just like list those courses down. Unless like again, as I mentioned, if some company comes for a very specific skill set, if Nvidia comes looking for people who have expertise in GPUs, then they will definitely look for people who have done the GPU course. And like if you have no background in GPUs and you're not done the GPU course, then you are essentially out before like anything even starts. So for very specific skill sets and job requirements, yes, like those specific courses help. But again, like from the point of for people who are coming out of industry right now, I don't think anybody is looking for that level of expertise. Um, I would expect that sort of requirement coming only for, like, say, master students. But again, it might differ based on the companies. But I would still say that I would still put practical experience a bit above, like, too many theoretical courses.
Got it. You answered my question like very well. That is something that is what I was expecting. Now regarding this COVID scenario, the upcoming placement seems a bit concerning for the students. So is there any advice you might have or anything you would suggest them to engage themselves in to be better equipped for their plans ahead?
Yeah. So for the upcoming batch, yeah, so there are a lot of issues, like even over here, in terms of like not so many roles being available right now. Um, so I think the best way to stand out is probably to upskill yourself. Like the number of roles available might have come down, so there definitely will be more competition for that. So anything that you can do to like set yourself apart, whether it's projects that you can do, if you have time to work on live projects and like kind of showcase that in your resume, try to do that. Any sort of a product or sort of a live application that you develop based on idea or a project, that's a very useful thing. Like if you end up creating like a dashboard of some sort, right? You can actually like share that on LinkedIn or on your resume itself, and that actually shows people that you know you actually build something using data, something that's like usable by others. Maintaining a good GitHub repo, like I myself have, while interviewing people for like the PDSC projects, I go through everybody's like GitHub repo. I think that's one way that I look for people and their experience, and I am aware of a lot of people that do the same. So having a good GitHub repo with at least like a few projects, which few repositories that are well maintained. Like I've seen like examples of people where they have like repos on a particular projects that are like very well maintained. Like they have a good documentation of it. People know exactly what's going on, and that's a good way for a recruiter or an interviewer to know that okay, this person has like worked on this and has like a good understanding of this particular domain. So having a good GitHub repo, if you can get papers published on any of your particular projects, that's one way to stand out. um, but yeah, I would also, I guess I should probably also caution that simply because I mentioned that you should try to have an online presence, do not like try to overdo it. Like I see this weird trend of people uh, essentially sort of oversharing on LinkedIn, or like, I mean, LinkedIn is supposed to be like for I guess like for professionals and stuff. And what I'm seeing right now is people sharing like very sort of arbit things on LinkedIn, essentially for the sake of sharing things and like increasing their online presence. I've seen a lot of cases of people essentially copy pasting other people's status and like sharing it as their own posts. Um, I could only assume that this is for the sake of like increasing their online presence. But I would seriously say that that is not helping anyone, because if I can see through it, I'm pretty sure like those who are recruiting, they can also see through it. So it's not really helping anyone if you follow that particular like that idea of like I can just share anything that I want, or like copy paste other people's posts and like share it, and like that is a way of increasing my online presence. Like I know they say like all publicity is like good publicity, but I guess there are ways that you can sort of overdo it and hurt your own chances. So do share like your achievements, like if you have paper published or you've done a project or you attended a webinar or you attended a conference, something of that sort. Do share that, do share your insights. That's always welcome. But just know where to sort of draw the line. Don't overdo the building the online presence by like doing all these things that I mentioned. Yeah, having an online presence is important. That building connections. So one thing that sets at least like the US apart from the India in a lot of in a significant ways, that Networking is a very important aspect of finding roles in the US. So at least in Insti, I guess you guys are lucky because Insti has a very specific placement cell, and they work really hard to make sure that everybody finds roles. And they kind of pride themselves in saying that, okay, everybody got placed, and like everybody had like this much package and all that. I mean, like the package number is not important, that's a different thing, but like they really focus on making sure that everybody finds a role. In US universities, the placement team guides you, they share resources with you, they bring companies on campus, but they do not keep like an exhaustive list of, okay, there are 40 people in this batch, did 40 people get placed or not. They don't they kind of just um, leave it up to you to finally land your jobs. They'll kind of give you the platform, they will help you to a certain extent to get in touch with the recruiters, but after that you're sort of on your own. So that is why like networking, reaching out to people, and getting referrals, and getting to know people within the company, that is a bit more important. But I do feel that right now, given the COVID situation, and like even without the COVID situation, I think even in India, this idea of like uh, networking, getting to know people is sort of catching up. People do rely on sort of people they recognize, people that they have seen on LinkedIn sharing their achievements and stuff, and that sort of builds a bit of sort of credibility to your profile. So I would say that in this particular time when roles are limited, people can also sort of invest in sort of networking a bit as well. And if nothing else works, like if none of these things actually work out, then I would suggest that maybe invest in research. Like if getting a full-time role which you like does not work out right now, then a good sort of an alternative in this meantime would be working on research. Um, so I'm not I'm not really sure like how um, like at least for my case, like when I wanted to do research, it was for my master's thesis. So there was a very sort of a well-defined process. Like you find a mentor and then you start doing research under them. Over here in the US, it's a less unstructured. Like you can essentially reach out to professors sort of whenever you want, and like if the professor has the project at that point, then you can start working on them. I'm not sure if the same applies in Insti as well, but I would say that definitely reach out to the professors and see that if there are opportunities for you to like do some sort of research in the meantime when you're like searching for full-time roles and stuff, because if you're not actually working at that time, the least that you can probably do is like upskill yourself and get involved in research, and like hopefully you could get like a publication out of it. So I guess like yeah, those could be like some of the broad tips that I would have.
Yeah, that was very insightful. I mean, especially the cautionary note about online presence, and then the networking, and then getting into research. So we have a few questions from our students as well,
Yeah.
who which we would like to ask. Yeah. So you already touched upon how DSA is important, or like that balance between the data science, and how is very deep math important for your ML and DL models? Like, is it something limited to the interviews like DSA, or like do you actually use a lot of math in your daily work as well?
Yeah. So I don't use that much of math in my daily work. So I think that's a good question. So even at over here, we have two courses of machine learning. So the reason they have two courses is that one is a bit more application oriented. They tell you the methodology, like they teach you like this is the ML model, this is the idea behind how it works, and they give like a very brief overview of the maths behind it. The other course is very much math focused. They deep dive into the mathematics behind it, like why this model works, why does this model work well, and like the proper maths behind like these ML models. And people take these two courses based on like what their sort of final career goal is. So people who want to work on ML research or want to work as research scientists and so on, they generally take the math intensive course, and the rest of the majority of the people they end, I mean, I wouldn't say the majority, but like most of the people, they end up taking the application focused one. So specifically for me, I haven't had the need to use a lot of maths. Like I have used a lot of statistics, like hypothesis testing. That's something which I've done a lot, but not like very math related to like uh, machine learning and stuff. Like even for like deep learning and stuff. Though I would say I'm somebody who is quite comfortable with understanding or reading like the math equations that come up in the deep learning papers and stuff. But in terms of actually using it, I haven't really come across that situation. Though I would still say that. So I chose to do the application-oriented machine learning course over here. The math intensive one, I didn't really do because I already had like a sort of a heavy course in that semester, and I essentially tried to keep my course load like on the lower side for all my semesters. So I took the application oriented one. It was quite easier for me to kind of complete that course. But despite having not taken that course, I was still able to like understand like some of the basic maths behind some of the deep learning papers that come out. So I would say that for I think it's a safe assumption to say that for majority of the data science machine learning roles out there, you can get away, you can do very well without knowing the intense sort of like the in-depth maths behind it. For a very specific sort of set of roles, if you're doing like proper ML research or deep learning research, then you might have the need for that. So if you're on the verge of deciding whether you need that level, that depth of maths knowledge or not, have a good idea in mind about what exactly is the role that you're interested in. Um, I would say that it's a safe assumption to say that if you're only looking for like the very like advanced role, like the research roles or something of that sort, then that's sort of the only sort of use case when you might actually need that depth of maths knowledge.
Okay, got it. So again, talking about that, so how much do you think again, like building up machine learning models from scratch versus using like having a good knowledge of the libraries? So how would you compare them?
Yeah, so in practice, you'll never be implementing models from scratch, like hardly ever. Like especially in the field of deep learning, I don't know like if you can actually do that. I mean, obviously you can do that, but uh, it's not even like a feasible idea. But that being said, a lot of courses do have cases where uh, they actually ask you to implement certain models from scratch, and this is done purely for the purpose of you know understanding the model. So in courses you might be asked, so one common thing which they do is asking people to implement or like compute back propagation in neural networks by hand, like from scratch. So a lot of the times people just like when they get into deep learning, they'll just write the code for the model in keras or pytorch, and they'll just like run it. They might not actually be aware of like what exactly is the back propagation step that happening, or like what's the impact of it. So in courses they don't teach you like, okay, this is backpropagation, this is the formula for it, and this is what it does in practice. It tries to improve your model in this particular way. um, but I do feel that at times when you implement that from scratch, like at least when I did those particular assignments on implementing them from scratch, it gave you a much better insight about how these things work. So yes, there is a good advantage of being able to implement these models from scratch. And for me personally, I would say that I am somebody who likes doing that. So certain cases like I'm not sure how relevant this might be, but like at least for like deep learning and stuff, right now a lot of people they use transfer learning where they just take a model like ResNet and they just run it on any computer vision data set they have. So one thing which I did as a sort of hobby, as a side experiment of mine, was try to sort of replicate the ResNet model architecture, look at the code, like the existing code that is, and try to kind of just break it down so that I get a better understanding of like what's actually happening. That's also a way for me to build my own confidence. Like at times I might feel that okay, I don't really know that much. I'm just like copy pasting code from here and there, and the model works, but like it's not because I knew how to do it. So at times, like breaking down those steps and like being confident that okay, I know what's actually happening, that gives you a boost, a kind of a confidence boost. And at times it can help you with technical interviews. If you know the in-depth mechanism of it, it can help you out in certain interviews. It did help me during my Amex interview. Like they asked me a few questions on like random forest, and like there are a lot of people who just take like the random forest code from like scikit-learn and just like put it over there. But I'm assuming that not everybody knows exactly what happens within a random forest, or like what are the different features, and like what do these different features, how does it affect the random forest. So trying to implement it from scratch actually make sure that you understand what's happening underneath. And so it is a definite it has a very definite use. Like you learn a lot, it improves the understanding of models, and it definitely will help you understand or at least like debug your code. Like when something goes wrong, and it almost always does, having this sort of an understanding helps you pinpoint like where exactly is the issue or where exactly is the error originating from. So having that that knowledge is important, but practically again, I don't think you would be doing a lot of implementing things from scratch.
Got it. So, another question is, what is your advice and path for someone who wants to become a data scientist in the USA? So, as in maybe completing their master's in education in India and then switching versus doing education there and getting in. Any other perspective?
So I'm not very familiar with the process of directly getting a job in the US from India. I know it's very much possible. People do that, um, but I'm just not very familiar with that part. So I don't think if I have enough insights on that particular uh, kind of that pathway. Though doing a master's is definitely helpful, and is an easy way to kind of get into the US job market. Though I must again say that right now the conditions are not ideal with the sort of things that are going on right now. But that was also one of the reasons why I guess I decided to like do the masters. So yeah, I mean, if you are end up doing a master's, it makes it much easier because you have the OPT option where you are sort of you get to like work with a company for like 2 to 3 years. You get like an OPT extension, also STEM extension. For I'm assuming for people who are directly coming for jobs without the US masters, they would have to likely get an H1B visa. I might be wrong, but that's what I understand right now. And as of now, like there are a lot of restrictions on H1B. Um, I mean, that's the new latest development on that. So, and I would assume that between the two choices, like the H1B or the OPT eligibility to work based on your FN visa, I would say the OPT is a bit more of a safer choice. The H1B is something which I guess would likely be targeted by the government in the future also. So I would say that the OPT pathway is a bit uh, less riskier.
Got it. Got it. So another question is, with so many people getting into data science, do you think that jobs related to data science are getting saturated?
Um, I don't think so. Uh, there are a lot of people who are getting into data science. I mean, yeah. So I'm not really sure what you mean by a lot of people getting into data science. Like, is does that if that's referring to people getting into the domain of data science, if they're getting data science jobs, like I guess like in both cases, I would say that a lot of people are getting into it, but then I also feel that um, I don't know how to like describe it. Like, so I guess from what I've seen, there's a huge chunk of like a majority of people who are quite new to it or don't have that say that theoretical background or that experience with them. So a lot of people are like jumping into data science because it's the big domain the right now, but a lot of them are jumping into it essentially by doing a few things here and there, looking at somebody's repo, replicating it, or doing one cal competition, and all of a sudden they're like, okay, I'm into data science and I'm a data scientist. So I feel that there are a lot of people of there are a lot of such candidates, and that's one of the reasons why like um, a lot of people don't end up getting roles because recruiters have like certain requirements which people might not be actually fulfilling. So it's a weird thing. They companies or like industry experts keep saying that there's a lot of demand, and then on the other hand you'll see there's a lot of people applying for these roles, but then people don't end up getting these roles. So it's kind of a weird phase where people are saying that there's a demand and there's a supply, but like it's sort of not matching in between. um, so I would say that there are definitely a lot of roles, like even for the existing roles, the number of qualified people for it um, might not be as much. So there's definitely a scope for people to upskill themselves and get into these roles. But that aside, I think the domain itself is growing in terms of its application. Like there are all sorts of different startups that are coming up. So essentially, for you have these new startups coming up which try to solve a very specific problem using data, and there are a lot of different problems that can be like solved or can be at least made better using data. So in terms of so essentially what I'm trying to say is that there are a lot of new avenues that are also opening up at the same time with new methodology and new say models and pipelines that are becoming available. People see the potential to solve new problems, and because of that, like new roles and opportunities also open up themselves. So I would only assume that the demand for data scientists will go up in the future. I mean, obviously, it might hit a saturation point somewhere in the future, but I don't think it's anywhere in the immediate future.
Got it. That answered the question very well. So yeah, this is the last question. Can you give some examples on the kind of problems that you work on right now?
Uh, so yeah, so I haven't really started working at Facebook, so I don't have anything from that end. But I can talk about my research bit. So during my 2 years over here, I worked on like different projects. So one was essentially a deep learning project on essentially understand like studying breast cancer. So uh, like one of the good things about UPenn is that it's very closely related to Penn Medicine, which is one of the biggest sort of like medical organizations in the US, and they have like a huge sort of repository data about patients and all that. So my project was essentially focused on like trying to understand like the sort of like the underlying causes for like breast cancer. So that was like something which I've worked on for quite a long period during my master's over here. The other recent one which I took up was NLP project on essentially identifying the symptoms of COVID through Twitter. So a lot of the times, like the hypothesis was that people tend to talk about their symptoms and stuff on Twitter, and that Twitter can be used as sort of an early detection tool much before like the World Health Organization or the CDC over here actually lists it as a particular symptom. So this was again like a deep learning sort of a approach where we were able to find that using Twitter we could actually identify certain symptoms like 2-3 weeks before CDC actually listed it as a symptom. So that was a project which I completed recently. um, there were a bunch of other like course projects, but I guess one thing which we should highlight is the project that we did with ACLU. So ACLU, as I mentioned earlier, is like a non-profit that fights these civil liberty cases. Like one of them which they focus on is criminal justice reform. So essentially, like laws regarding the criminal system, like who goes to jail, how long do they stay there, and essentially this particular problem set was about bail. So I think that's something. Um, uh, I think the idea of bail is similar in India as well. Like if you are charged with a case, you have to pay the bail amount to stay out of jail, right? So they essentially wanted to understand the effect of bail amount in the state of Pennsylvania, like where I am. So they actually try to see if uh, people from like African American people were sort of like if the laws were sort of biased towards African American people compared to like say their Caucasian counterparts. So where people from African American origins where they um charged higher bail amounts or where they charged cash bail a lot more than like say Caucasian defendants. So that was sort of the overall like the problem statement that they had in mind. They actually want to understand that is there a significant difference between how judges assign bail to both these groups, and they gave us a bunch of data on like different crimes, like a sort of a criminal database of sorts, and we essentially analyzed this data set and we able to show that okay, in certain cases we can actually show that the bail amount, like the difference in bail amount assigned, is actually statistically significant. Like there was a huge gap between the bail amount uh, given to white, like Caucasian defendants as compared to African American defendants, and like that was quite a significant sort of a finding because that was enough for them to actually go and say that, the system is biased right now, and that the system needs reform. We need to change the existing laws to make it more fair for like all people. And I think that was one of the reasons. I think the novelty of what we did was one of the reasons, like that work got accepted at this was the web conference. And yeah, I think that was one of the last projects that I worked on.
That was very interesting and I think very inspiring also for students to be, work on this, like use this data science as a tool and like actually impact something in real life.
Yeah, I
So
think that's something which like institutes should also sort of look into. Like
mm,
data science for social good is a huge sort of a thing, at least in the US. So there are like different data science for social good chapters across US. So essentially, data scientists working on different cases, like how to eradicate poverty or like urban development, stuff like that. And you'll find a lot of cases where non-profits, NGOs, they have data, but they don't really know what to do with it or how to go about solving it. So yeah, it just reminds me of another project which I'll just like quickly just mention that. So this is a bit more of a deep learning solution to a social good project. So there's this company called Dimaxion Labs based out of Argentina. So what they do is they use satellite imagery to uh, essentially identify slum areas within Argentina. So typically governments, they used to send people to survey different areas. They would go around, they will look at the place, and they'll count the number of houses and the number of people and so on. It was a very labor intensive task, and it required a lot of resources. So what this company did was essentially they used computer vision to first of all identify which are the slum regions, and then they used another deep learning model to count the number of houses. They essentially just counted the number of roofs in that particular region, and they got the number of houses. And using the number of houses, they just sort of predicted the number of people in that particular slum settlement. So this was a tool, like it's a very good application of a computer vision tool that a government can actually use to inform their policies or the laws that they make. So it's a huge field, and I think like people in INSTI should like seriously think up about like using it as one of the things that they focus on.
that was very inspiring. I mean, personally for me as well as I think all the students will be watching this.
Sure.
So yeah, that's it from our side. And on behalf of all the IIT Madras students, thank you so much for your time. The session was very informative, comprehensive, and cleared a lot of doubts that students had. Thank you again.
Sure. Glad to be helped.